Welcome to Hope in the Future with Pastor Ben Foxworth. Check in with us here regularly to hear God's words of instruction and encouragement.
On January 15th of 2009, Chesley Burnett Sully Sullenberger II, airline captain of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York City en route to Charlotte Douglas International Airport in North Carolina. Soon after takeoff, the big plane, which was an Airbus, an A320, carrying a total of about 155 people aboard, hit a flock of Canadian geese, and that rendered the engines of the plane inoperative. When that happened, the airplane began rapidly dropping in altitude. When that happened, Captain Sully then asked his co-pilot, Jeffrey Skiles, for the QR, or the Quick Response Manual. In emergencies like that one, pilots are supposed to consult the QR, and in this case, that manual instructed the pilots to try restarting the engines and then attempt an emergency landing if restarting didn't work. Well, when that first piece of advice didn't work, Captain Sully steered the plane, making a snap decision to make an emergency landing on the surface of the Hudson River. Well, the landing was successful because Captain Sully kept his cool under those disastrous, life-threatening circumstances. All 155 people on Flight 1549 made it off the plane safely. As a result, Sully, his co-pilot, and the first responders that quickly came to the landing scene were all lauded as heroes, and the event afterward became known as the Miracle on the Hudson. Later on, when he was speaking about him consulting the Quick Response Manual during the emergency, Sully revealed that while he himself consulted the QR, he estimated that somewhere around 80% of airline captains did not bother to consult the QR during emergencies, which basically means 80% at that time, 80% of airline pilots and co-pilots, they did not trust the QR manual enough to open it up and follow its directions, so they simply improvised their own emergency procedures. That leads me to ask everyone in here this morning, when you have an emergency, where do you turn to first? When something that you feel is pressing, where do you turn to first? Do you automatically turn to worry and panic? Does that drive you to try winging some desperate Hail Mary move? Or do you do what King David did whenever fear and foes threatened to dismantle and destroy him? This morning, we are going to take a look at Psalm 25. This is known as one of David's laments, one of his psalms of desperation, where he fully admitted. We think about David, we think of him as a warrior king. We think of him as a young man felling Goliath and, helping put the Philistines to rout. But yet, even though he was a great warrior and he had all of this strength and people trusted him, he still knew that he knew full well that he did not have everything that it took to single-handedly solve his worst problems. He knew that he absolutely needed God's love, God's friendship, and especially God's mercy, forgiveness, and salvation. So Psalm 25, like many psalms, it is a heartfelt song that we ourselves can recite it, we can sing it if we feel confident, we can pray it within our hearts. Like David's laments, we can cry out to God when we feel the need for God's mercy. And also, just like David's praises, which were kind of the opposite, we can also shout to God if we wish to pour out our hearts in gratitude and worship to Him. To start off, let's take a look at the first 3 verses of Psalm 25. Beginning at verse 1, Lord, I appeal to you. My God, I trust in you. Do not let me be disgraced. Do not let my enemies gloat over me. No one who waits for you will be disgraced. Those who act treacherously without cause will be disgraced. Have you ever felt the dread of being disgraced? That's some pretty intense stuff. Have you ever dreaded the thought of either enemies or just hostile circumstances getting the better of you? Have you dreaded the thought of you being stripped and covered over in shame? I have. I definitely have, and I'm willing to bet that many of us here have at one point or another. And if you haven't, well, don't worry. In this world, your time will come eventually at some point. I'm sorry to say. Which is why this message, I believe God has put upon me. So in David's psalm, he very specifically asks God, I appeal to you. I trust in you. Please do not let me be disgraced. Please don't let enemies and bad circumstances get the better of me. And we in the church know that enemies, in the context that we deal with, enemies are mostly of a spiritual nature. That our enemies are the rulers, the authorities, the cosmic powers of darkness, of evil spiritual forces in the heavens. Basically, the bad guys are not your neighbors that talk bad about you behind your back. We're talking about heavenly things that are bigger than that. We're also talking about as an enemy our own sinful flesh, which never, ever seems to get tired of dragging us down and attempting to destroy us. But David declares, no one who waits for you, God, will be disgraced. Let me ask, do you believe this? Do you trust God enough to declare that and to tell Him openly that you believe no matter what happens, no matter what your eyes may tell you at the moment, you know that, like Jesus declares in John 16:33, I have told you these things that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world. So no, it is only those who act treacherously and who persecute others without cause who will ultimately be disgraced. Now, don't hear me saying that this is like some magic pill, a magic prayer to say that's going to cure all of adversity. There is a lot more to this than just simply a prayer. In verses 4 and 5, we read that God, He not only saves us from present difficulties, He actually instructs us in the correct way that we should go. Verse 4, make your ways known to me, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in the truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. I wait for you all day long. Now you may trust God with a roadside, like a roadside flare prayer. God, help, quick. But do you have patience enough, though, to let Him instruct you in future matters? Yes. Part of this is praying to God immediately when you know something is up. But do you also have patience to let Him instruct you when things move forward? That pesky sinful nature in us, it's very quick to accept help from God, but there's something in us that, at least at first in any situation, it just seems a bit hesitant to allow Him to change us, to change our thinking, and to ask us to listen to His instruction. That pesky sinful nature leads us to go, oh, come on, I just want out of this situation. I don't want to have to really change. Well, over time, for a believer, God's Spirit in that believer fights against the old nature and allows us to have a desire to finally learn God's ways. A desire to learn to shed our old ways, like shedding an old skin, like molting, until we actually want to wait for Him all day long if necessary. That way, He may lead us in His way. Because, if we're honest about them, many of our emergencies, they come from our own sinfulness. Not all of them certainly, but spiritual discernment can show us the difference between things that come from a result of sin and things that come from actual persecution from enemies or circumstances that treat us treacherously without cause. In verses 6 and 7, David writes, remember, Lord, your compassion and your faithful love, for they have existed from antiquity. Do not remember the sins of my youth or my acts of rebellion. In keeping with your faithful love, remember me because of your goodness, Lord. David writes as a means of remembrance. Pastor Ben talks all the time about remembering, about how worship is basically remembering, and remembering to thank God for everything that He's done. But David writes this as a means of remembrance, of remembering God's ancient and depthless love. He asks God to discard the sins of his youth as well as his present acts of disobedience because it's in God's nature to forgive when forgiveness is truly asked for. And David expands on these ideas in verses 8 through 11. Verse 8, the Lord is good and upright. Therefore, he shows sinners the way. He leads the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. All the Lord's ways show faithful love and truth to those who keep his covenant and decrees. Lord, for the sake of your name, forgive my iniquity, for it is immense. Now let's take a minute. Let's just take a minute to ponder that last verse, verse 11, that we just read, especially those last 4 words. For the sake of your name, forgive my iniquity, for it is immense. Have you ever felt the weight of your sin? Even as a believer, or maybe even especially as a believer with the Holy Spirit in us, have you felt the awful burden of having broken faith with God even for a short while? Well, those last 4 words about David's sin, and mine as well, they always get me when I read them. For it is immense. We sometimes, again, that pesky sin nature in us likes to look at our sin from time to time as small things. They're peddly little indiscretions. Everybody does them. But when God puts us in circumstances that causes the scales to fall from our eyes, and we see the size and the scope of our rebellion, both past and in the present, we finally see their enormity. And enormity, it's just like the old-fashioned sense of the word enormity. It can also mean not only the size of a really big object, but also the grave consequences of a sinful action. The enormity of a sin. But before we drag ourselves through these things too much, let us thank God. Even though our sin is immense, God forgives us whenever we ask. And he doesn't do it just for our sake, but for the sake of his name. His love for us is great. It certainly is. But God also must defend the honor of his own name. So when he said that he would forgive those who asked him rightly and repentantly, he meant it. And he will always mean it. Verses 12 through 15 of Psalm 25. David shows a picture of the result of heeding God's instruction. Verse 12, who is this person who fears the Lord? God will show him the way he should choose. He will live a good life, and his descendants will inherit the land. The secret counsel of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he reveals his covenant to them. My eyes are always on the Lord, for he will pull my feet out of the net. So, who is this person who fears the Lord? Well, David describes for us what it looks like for a person to follow God's merciful instruction. He draws a picture of one who does this, a person who does this, and he describes the results. Now, the results in, say, we take a look at verse 13. He will live a good life, and his descendants will inherit the land. You could read that in a purely physical or material sense. And yes, God, when God told when he told his people, Israel, honor your father and mother, that way your days in the land will continue. There is that sense, yes, in kind of a material sense. However, the results here in the age of Christ, we see beyond just material stuff. We're promised things beyond earthly treasures. However, the end result is sure. My eyes are always on the Lord, for he will pull my feet out of the net. And let me tell you, I have felt that. What feels like I'm trapped. I can't get out of this. What am I going to do? Whenever our enemies, the world, our own flesh, the devil, whenever they set a trap for us, it's just like the one described in Psalm 57:6. They prepared a net for my steps. I was despondent. They dug a pit ahead of me, but they fell into it. When we fall into the hands of our enemies and it feels like there's no hope, there's no light, it feels like we're caught and we're cooked, and that's it. If we first cry out to God with the prayer of our hearts, instead of starting and stewing in panic, oh no, what's going on? Well, I don't know how to do this. Instead of worrying because of the trap that we found ourselves in, God will, in his time and in his way, free you from that snare. Now finally, let's look at verses 16 through 22. Verse 16, turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am alone and afflicted. The distresses of my heart increase. Bring me out of my sufferings. Consider my affliction and trouble, and forgive all my sins. Consider my enemies. They are numerous, and they hate me violently. Guard me and rescue me. Do not let me be disgraced, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and what is right watch over me, for I wait for you. Finally, verse 22, God redeem Israel from all its distresses. Have you ever felt alone as well as afflicted? Well, when you're stressed, oppressed, depressed, and distressed, is that when you feel like life's a great big party with friends over? No, probably not. In verse 16, David captures the very essence of what it means to be in trouble. You're not only suffering from what you're in the middle of, you also feel absolutely isolated in your troubles. Nobody understands. Who could understand? I don't want anybody to know, these circumstances. And here's a word of caution while we're on this subject. When you're in that headspace, that's where our enemy, the devil, really likes us to be. As believers, as agents of Christ here in the world that Satan is trying to destroy, the world of people, he loves it when we're there in our thoughts. He wants us alone and afflicted, because that's when he can lead us further and further from God and his saving comfort, and lead our thoughts further and further away from those around us who need to hear about God's saving ability. The distresses of my heart increase. Bring me out of my sufferings. Again, no matter how many times you've come to God and begged Him for His help, He is waiting for you to come to Him again. When your troubles multiply, and they just seem to keep on multiplying, don't waste a second worrying. God is waiting for you to come to Him and to pray and ask, consider my afflictions and trouble, forgive all my sins. God, for the believer, God is your comforter. He's your Savior. Jesus went through every imaginable tribulation that we can go through in this life. He is the believer's kinsman redeemer, who knows what it feels like to be desperate and alone and filled with the dread of shame and pain and humiliation. Hebrews 4:15 spells it out. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Verse 19, consider my enemies. They are numerous and they hate me violently. Well, Jesus knows those enemies. He's fought those enemies, the world, our own flesh, the devil. He's fought those enemies and He's defeated them. Now that doesn't mean, again, just like in the verse that we just took a look at, He conquered them, but that doesn't mean He becomes impatient with us. Like human beings can be impatient. Hey, I was successful. How come you're not successful? Hey, get in the river. Learn to swim. Learn to fly right. Do what I did. No. Instead, He knows what we feel. He knows the defeat, the shame, the fear, the anger, because He's felt it. He has felt these things too firsthand. But He successfully conquered each one. And His desire is to lead us who are not able to do what He did. He wants to lead us through His sacrifice to the victory over sin and affliction that He won for us. Guard me and rescue me. Do not let me be disgraced, for I take refuge in You. May integrity and what is right watch over me, for I wait for You. Take your refuge, please. Take your refuge in God. Take your refuge in His Son today. If you have not asked for His salvation, if you've not asked for His grace, if you've not asked for His forgiveness, won through Jesus Christ, please, I would encourage you, do so today. He wants to be there for when you seek Him. He wants to tear down that barrier that closes humanity off from God. Jesus died and rose again to bring God and us together. So let me ask again, do you trust Him? Do you trust God enough to give Him your sin, your troubles, your loneliness? Do you trust Him enough, both believers and those who are not believers? Your life can change despite all the pain and the sorrow that this world offers. God's salvation is not, it's not, remember that old, I don't even know if they make it anymore, remember Anacin? It's not a pill. It's not something that can be bought and sold. It's not something that's going to cure all your ills. In this world you will have trouble, yes, but God, through his Son, has already overcome this world and its trouble. Call on him, please. Wait on him to rescue you. Don't ignore the QR that God has given to you. Don't try to wing your own rescue. I will guarantee you it won't work, especially in an eternal sense. It's not going to work. God wants to rescue you, and he waits to rescue all those who come to him. Please come to him today.